Welcome back to another episode of the 2 Dates in a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. On today's episode, I interview Roger Butts, a hospital chaplain, pastor, and the author of Seeds of Devotion. Now sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the 2 Dates in a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the 2 Dates in a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. Before I introduce my man Roger Butts, he's I think this is actually the first one I've ever had. First pastor type person I've ever had on the show, and this is episode 115. So this could go really cool, really fast because I'm a super spiritual guy, as most of you know, and but I've never had a chance to converse on the show with somebody who does it for a living, and so I'm really excited to share this with you guys. But before we talk to him, I want to tell everybody where they can hear the podcast, pretty much anywhere. iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, that's pretty much where you can find it. All they ask is that you hit the automatic download button. That just helps me as far as my metrics and knowing who is actually downloading and listening to the show. If you want to learn more about me personally, my career, things I've accomplished, my passions, you can go to mattcubbler.com, and that's also where you can find a copy of my book, A Brother's Love and Memoir. I wrote this 15 years ago, and it's a tribute to my brother Andy, who was autistic and stuttered, and sadly was killed in a car accident in 1989 at the age of 21. I was 18 at the time, and it's sort of saved my life writing that book. And it's my tribute to our life together and our journey and our story. And then it shares how his death impacted my life and how I got to become the man I am today through many, many toils and turns. So if you're interested in buying a copy of A Brother's Love and Memoir, please do so. You can get it at Amazon and pretty much anywhere books are sold online. If you want to get me on YouTube, you can go to Matt Cubbler as well on YouTube. And all I ask is that you hit the subscribe and that little bell notification thingy that allows you to know when I have a new episode that comes on board. All right, that's it. That's the show. No, just kidding. All right, without further ado, my man Roger Butts, how are you?
Good. It's really good to be with you. And I want to, I want to interview you now about that book. Forget my book, Seeds of Devotion. I want to hear about that book. It sounds powerful.
It is. I'll just give you a little bit of history on how it happened. It happened when I said it saved my life, I wasn't kidding.
Right.
I'd gone through 13 years of severe depression and anger issues after my brother died. And that was 1989 when he died. So 2002, there was this event that happened in my life where my grandmother gave me a quilt that was made out of my brother's clothing that she had saved for 13 years. And she gave it to me after my son was born, who I named after my brother. And that night that I got that quilt, I went down to first of all, I was a wreck just from holding something that was tangibly on my brother's body. But I went down to the basement and wrote for like 8 or 10 hours, just memories. And they just kept flooding. It was this wave of reflection and emotion and memory that came back to me, and I wrote them all down. And that night I wrote 26,000 words.
Wow.
And most, if not all of those 26,000 words are in this book. So It just I wasn't trying to write a book. I was just trying to heal. And I came up, and my mom's a retired English teacher. And I called her and I said, Mom, I had the most amazing experience last night. And I came up and I feel different. I feel better. I feel forgiven. And she goes, oh, well, what happened? And I told her, and I said, what do I do with 26,000 words I wrote? And she said, son, you write a book.
Yeah.
I said, Mom, I haven't read a book since ninth grade Animal Farm, right? That was the last book I read. I'm like, I don't think I'm probably the person to write one. So needless to say, I ended up reading some books to make sure I was capable of doing that first. And then I ended up writing one. And that's what 2006, I published this, and it's been going strong ever since. So, but that's the history behind A Brother's Love.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
You're
that's
welcome.
powerful.
So tell me a little bit about what's going on out there in Colorado Springs, Colorado today.
Well, it's a beautiful day. It's been rainy and cold. but today we've turned a corner and it's bright, and June is here, and so it's been nice. And I live right at the base of Pikes Peak. Every morning I get to see Pikes Peak, and often it's got snow up there, and I give thanks for that every day. And Cheyenne Mountain and NORAD, all that stuff is right there in my front yard as well.
That's got to be amazing. I love, there's very few places in the world that I am in awe of, and the Colorado Rockies is by far number one on my list of places that I'm in awe of. And I'm actually driving out next month. My son and I, my son's graduating high school, and he's gonna be going to college doing ROTC, and we're doing a 2-week cross-country trip. He and I sleeping in an SUV. We're not getting hotel rooms. We're stopping and staying at people's houses, but we're going fishing out in Montana. Was the whole reason we were going out there. But yeah, one of the places we're going through is Rocky Mountain National Park, and we're going to do Big Peak and all that. So I'm excited to get back out there. It's been a while since I've seen those beautiful mountain peaks. So I'm a little jealous of you because I look outside and I see 2 nuclear reactors outside of my house. So not necessarily the same beauty.
Not quite the same.
No.
Oh, Montana,
but they do have clouds over top of them. It's that steam coming off. But
yeah, exactly. Rocky Mountain National Park is one of the great gifts in all of America, and the YMCA of the Rockies is right next to it, and that's a special place up there. We go to Estes a lot, and my wife and the kids are going to Estes at the end of this month, so we go up there a lot. It's beautiful. So I hope you have a great time with your kid, and congratulations.
Yeah, we're excited. It's we're going to turn it into kind of like one of those. I want it to be one of those trips where we're always talking about it, whether it's how bad the night's sleep was in the backseat on an air mattress, or whatever the shitty condition is, because that's what the military is built on, the camaraderie of going through shit together, right? So I want my son's life is going to be that, and I want him to appreciate the amazingness of shitty experiences, and how when you share them together, that's really cool.
That's exactly it. And finding the joy in the shitty experience is the whole project, isn't it?
It is. All right. Well, I ask one question to everybody. It's the same question. It's broad. It can be answered however you want, however long it takes you to answer it. There's no rules to the game. So the question I ask everybody is, and now granted, I don't ask everybody who is Roger Butts because that would be weird. But what I'm going to ask you is, who is Roger Butts?
Yes, if you asked other people who Roger Butts is, it would be a very quick conversation because I don't think anybody would know me. But I'm a minister. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. I am a I'm interspiritual, but I'm a follower of the way of Jesus. I am a hospital chaplain by profession, vocation. That's how I put bread on the table. And I am the dad of 3 teenagers. My wife is a pastor as well in the United Church of Christ. So I love to play tennis. I have a dog, Black Lab. I listen to people for a living. I listen to stories, a little bit like you. And I love stories. And I've just written a book, first book at 55. So I'm very proud of that.
Congratulations.
And thank you. So that's a little bit of who I am. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois. As soon as I could get out of there, I got out of there. Because it was like 1984 and it was just depressed and difficult. And so I went to school at Appalachian State in the mountains in North Carolina. My uncle was a professor there. And so I went because I didn't know where else to go. I was like, well, I don't know. I didn't take school very seriously. So I was like, what should I do? And my Uncle Gene was nice enough to get me into Appalachian State. And I had the greatest time. My roommate was gay, and a bunch of my friends were gay. And I hadn't really experienced that before. And it opened my world. And then I read like Garcia Marquez and Ulysses by James Joyce, and it was just amazing. And it completely turned me around from this kind of very narrow worldview to a broader worldview. And that's a little bit of who I am.
That's awesome. And just a little side note, my stepfather is a UCC pastor as well, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, go Congregationalist.
Yeah, it's your kids don't get a break, do they?
Oh no, they have no. There's no hope. Those poor kids.
Yeah, I at least had a teacher for a mother, so I had a little bit of a break, but yeah, man, I being a preacher's kid, I know what it was like being a teenager, being a preacher's kid, and the expectations that are placed upon you simply because you're the kid of a pastor, and how I tended to rebel against that. Well, to be honest, and yeah, my stepdad and I weren't necessarily seeing eye to eye for a long period of time there, and but I do truly appreciate and honor the work that he does, and his commitment to not only his faith but to the congregations in which he's served. The level of effort that is required to be a pastor, a full-time pastor, is unlike anything anyone can even imagine. And they're not paid for it. So you're on call 24 hours a day. You have to respond and do things off duty hours more often than you are on duty hours, and you don't get any extra credit, other than hopefully maybe there's some heavenly pantheon where you sit somewhere up in the realm of heaven that says, hey, you went the extra mile, we're going to let you have like the bigger house up there or something like that.
That's right.
So,
and I work in a hospital, so I have set hours, but the intensity of what I deal with in the hospital can be a little much, so I have to really engage in self-care. But I see it with, before I was a parish minister for 11 years, and I see it with Marta, my wife. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of stress, and it's a lot of, ministry is so much about people projecting their stuff onto you. Like, oh, you should be this, or you should be this, or because you're this, you should be that. And it's just such silliness, because you can't be all those things. And so it's an interesting dynamic to always be available and differentiated. It's just a wild construct ministry.
Well, it's kind of like police work. There's so many similarities in, not necessarily in the jobs, but there are actually in the jobs, because my job is to solve problems, and yours is to solve problems a lot of the times. Whether the problem is questions of faith or morality or forgiveness, mine sometimes involves those things. But the expectation of who you are from the person that are observing you is exhausting, and unreachable, and yet there is no margin of error. Right. So you have to be literally dialed into God and have all the answers, or you fail them in their eyes. And I have to have the ability to solve every crime within an hour, just like on CSI or whatever. And if I don't, then I failed them. And nobody cares whether or not it's reasonable.
Right.
They want you to do your job to whatever level of exceptionalism they believe you should be doing your job. So I can totally sympathize with that stress level.
Let me just share with you a prayer. I'm gonna share with you a prayer from my book, Seeds of Devotion.
Please.
Weekly Contemplations on Faith. it's not even a prayer. It's labeled a prayer, but it's more like a meditation. But this is what I think about when I think about chaplaincy. And it's it's a couple, it's not terribly long, but this is my orientation towards chaplaincy. Since we're talking about this, I might as well get it out of the way, right? First, walk gently. You're entering into the great mystery. Sorrow, regret, anger, grief, relief. You never know what you'll find. You may as well walk gently into that room, which will likely be dark and quiet. Second, talk gently. The dead dream and the survivors do too. They're in a fog or out to sea or in the deep woods. Pick your image. But talk gently. That mystery will one day be you and yours. Third, act gently. Your gentleness will invite whatever needs to happen to happen. If at all possible, make it so the wife, husband, mother, child hardly knows you're there. Listen gently. Listen with your eyes and your ears and mostly your heart. The stories will come. Be there to hear them. Stories remind the wife that she is still alive and is alone and not alone at the same time. Be the Spirit or Jesus or Muhammad or the Buddha. Pick your guide and be that person. Mary, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, it matters not. Of course, you are the best option. So be you in all of your quirky, unexpected, beautiful, flawed, perfect essence.
Wow, dude, you got a way with words. Well done. Well done.
Yeah. So that's a little bit different than cops. You probably have to be a little bit harder. Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, that is. Now, there are days when you are the listener, and you're not there to do anything but listen.
Right.
And they may not know that. They may not know that that you're only going to listen.
Right.
But at the end, when being a good cop is like being a good pastor. Is you have to understand the need of the person you're ministering to, and I have to understand the need of the person who's requiring my services. And
that's right.
That starts with first a conversation, or at least a listening component of a conversation on my end, in order to understand what's going on, and then an ability to understand human behavior and the ability to read a room and to read body language and understand tension levels and all that kind of stuff comes with, just like when you walk into a room when someone's on hospice, and there's I've had family members on hospice, and there are times we're in the room and we're laughing and joking because we're trying to keep it light and we're trying to not be constantly in the suck. But when you walk in, you got to know what the room is, and is everybody feeling morose, or are they feeling reflective? Like there's so many different ways that you can address your person you're ministering to, depending on what the needs.
And the idea is to create space so that you can let them do whatever it is. The other day, somebody's husband had just died, and she was a smart aleck, and after talking for like 15 minutes, she cracked a joke about something, and she was like, "Oh my God, is it okay if I laugh?" And I was like, "Of course it is, right? You're going to feel all those things. Just do what you're going to do." So that's my work. I do chaplaincy, and out of that chaplaincy came this book. Out of centering prayer came this book, and I think there's a religious term called kenosis, which is self-emptying, and in the Christian tradition, Jesus is said to have self-emptied himself and left the comfort of his godness and became human. And that self-emptying, that self-giving is a key idea in Christianity. And that's what I've learned to do with my prayer life, is just create space so that God can do whatever God's going to do. And And that's what chaplaincy is too. Like create space so that whatever happens can happen. And I like the work. I like it.
How did you like? Oh, I have some feedback there. How did when you? I asked my dad this because my dad was my stepdad. I call him my dad because I haven't spoken to my biological father in 27 years. But my stepdad was a drummer in a rock band, very popular rock
Love
band.
it.
And then all of a sudden, that's when he met my mom. My mom was a cocktail waitress at a Holiday Inn when his band was playing, and that's how they met. So,
Love it.
how did I know how he became a pastor? And much to my astonishment, that I wasn't getting a rock star for a stepfather, I was getting a pastor. How did you have your come to Jesus moment when you realized that this was the path in which you wanted to pursue?
So so I went to Appalachian State, and then I moved up to DC, and I worked for a senator, and a Democratic senator from North Carolina. And in 92, at the end of 92, we lost our re-election campaign. Senator Sanford was a beloved character, but he had heart issues in the summer before the election, and it was just too much to overcome. And so I thought, as a 26-year-old or whatever I was in 1992, that the worst thing that could happen to somebody in their 20s was losing a re-election campaign in a job that they loved. And then the next month, my dad died. And I was like, oh, losing an election is not even remotely close to the worst thing that can happen to you. And so the next 6 or 7 years, I continued to go to All Souls Church in DC. I continued to think about these things. Like I worked as a teacher. I did a bunch of different things. But always I was coming back to like the Catholic workers. I was coming back to like Church of the Savior, which is like this group that has homeless shelters and job centers and retreat centers. And I was always just interested in what makes a faith community stand for their deepest values: human equality, fairness, the idea that all can flourish. And I decided that I wanted to go to seminary to study that. So Wesley Seminary was in DC and at American University, and Senator Sanford and some others wrote recommendation letters, and somehow they let me in. And so I went to study, how do faith communities, however they're called, whatever they're, conservative, liberal, progressive, evangelical, whatever it is, Jewish, how do they live out their deepest values? And that's what I wanted to study. And as I went through, it was clear that I was going to go into ministry. And so that's how I ended up in ministry. So I was in senior ministry for 11 years. And then I've been in chaplaincy for like 7 or 8 years. And I've been an associate minister for part of that time. And now I'm helping my wife with her ministry up in the Black Forest. So that's how I became a minister. I wasn't the best senior minister ever. That wasn't my real call. And chaplaincy is pretty good.
Now, how did you know that, how did you know whether you were good at that? Like, what was your metric of knowing that you weren't necessarily the best senior minister?
Well, I didn't find life from like board meetings and raising money and all of that. My wife is really good at it. She's super organized. I'm not so organized. and so there were parts of it that I was really pretty good at and parts of it that I just sucked at. And I was like, all right, fuck this. I'm done with that. And and that's what a lot of the chapters are about in here is like, you talked about how writing that book saved your life. And I have a chapter in here called Carl Scoville Saved My Life. Carl Scoville was a minister at King's Chapel in Boston, you know, on the Freedom Trail there. And I'd never met him. We were in the same denomination, but I didn't know him. He didn't know me. But he wrote this little essay in the 90s. And I came across it. And this little paragraph, the great surmise says simply this: at the heart of all creation, there is a purposeful goodness from which we come and which we live our fullest, to which we shall at last return. And that is the supreme reality of our lives. When I was completely disoriented, like, who am I now that I'm not a senior minister? What am I supposed to do? That stayed with me, and it never left me, and it helped anchor me and helped let me take the next steps.
I love that there is a story, and most people, if they're intuitive and self-reflective and willing to admit their good parts and bad parts, have a story. They just don't. They may not know it. They may not know how they got to this bad spot or to this good spot or through both of them, but there's always a story behind the transformation. And
Yes.
my mom always says, and I always refer back to my mother because she's my hero, and that's where I learned everything about life is through her. When I asked her the morning after I wrote all those memories, and she said, you write a book, one other thing she said to me that really stood out to me, because it's the truth, I think, because everybody has a story to tell, but not
Yes.
everybody can tell that story. And
Right.
and it takes certain people to be storytellers. And there are certain
Right.
people that know their story and know how to, but can't necessarily share it in a way that impacts another person in the way that you would expect it to. So for people like us who have a story, who, God willing, continue to allow us to have the ability to share that story, I think that's the important component to what we do. Is that, you know, my profession for 28 years has been police officer, but what I've really been is a servant.
Right.
That's
Right.
what I am. I'm a servant in 15,000 different capacities. Like, I'm a husband, I'm a
That's right.
father, I'm a podcast host, I'm a inspirational speaker, I'm a bodyguard, I'm a entrepreneur. Every one of my titles, the underlying component is I serve.
That's right.
And when you know that, it opens up the clarity of life, and it takes a little bit of that uneasiness on what does life mean, and where do I go, and how long do I have, and is it going to be tomorrow, or is it do I live to 100, whatever those questions that are obviously unanswerable. It takes away that fear of those things, because I know clearly what my job is and what my role is and what God has planned for me, and for whatever period of time that might be, I will serve, and then that's it. I don't have any other concerns.
That's right.
Do you
That's
have
it. You know,
do you find yourself having those, because obviously your book is very in depth into understanding the different ways in which you became yourself. So the different prayers, the intuitions, the concepts of how to help someone heal. I'm sure that's all encompassing in your book. When you came up with the idea to write this book, was it something that you came up a long time ago and just took a while to write, or was it I sat down and it just came out kind of moment?
so the book is Weekly Contemplations on Faith. So there are small, like 52 small chapters, a short story, a prayer, and reflection questions. And the reflection questions are an attempt to allow everyone, whether they write a book or just talk to their spouse or partner or whatever, to think about the events of their lives in the way that you've thought about the events of your lives, and I think about mine, in a way that will enable them to find that purpose and meaning in their own story. So I say, make of your life a gospel, right? I mean, it's just all the ingredients are there. So when I wrote this book, it was the time of COVID. It was COVID time. And the reason I jumped in is I knew that I had a bunch of stories, and I knew that I had a bunch of prayers. I didn't have all of them, but I had a bunch. So like some of the prayers were first published like 20 years ago. Most of them are more recent than that. But what happened was I began to realize I had a bunch of these stories lying around from 20 years of ministry. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something there. But then Grace Light Press, and a friend of mine who owns a publishing house, said, Roger, we've been talking about this for years. You've got a book in you. Get it done. And COVID gave me the space and the time and the opportunity to do it because there weren't as many activities. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can do this. And once I put my head to it and got an editor, and the editor made it better and all of that, it really began to flow out of me. So in March 1st, I think it came out. And that's after 8-9 months of hard work and good editing. So it was a little bit of both. I knew I had something in me. I didn't quite know how to birth it into the world. And my friend gave me a kick in the ass, and here it is.
I believe you are where you are when you're supposed to be there.
Exactly.
And there isn't. You can only push the rock up the hill so many times before you realize it's not getting any farther. And I think the best people, that's the right way of saying it, identify the moments, identify the doors that are opening, identify the path.
Yep.
And that comes with decluttering your brain and your heart. That comes with that feeling of I'm no longer in the weeds, and the noise isn't drowning out the message. And that comes from typically the ability to have a relationship with whatever God you have. I
Right.
believe that you need to suffer loss. At some point in time, we all die. There's just we've never been able to figure out how to end that part. And I think the loss component for me,
Yes.
If someone's there to support you when it happens, helps you manage and understand life better. And that's a perspective that you may not have had because you didn't know how fragile it was.
That's right.
I wasn't necessarily, and I tell people this because I'm not the blueprint on trauma recovery. I'm
Right.
the anomaly that it took 13 years of destructive behavior and depression and anger
Yep.
and a moment of grace to save me from all that. And somehow in my profession, and I was on SWAT during that time, and I was doing crazy shit that should have gotten me killed. And I was daring God to take me.
Right.
So I'm not the blueprint. I'm the anomaly. But when you finally have that moment of grace, whether it's through a friend kicking you in the ass saying it's time to write this book, or, well, and you have to see that, like that's God saying, this is now.
Right.
Go forth and do my work. And that's kind of where I took it from. And that's when that happened to me, that was God. So, and
Right.
I was angry. I hated that motherfucker. I did. I was so angry at him for what he did by taking my brother, who was the most amazingly, genuinely angelic person ever. he had no, wasn't angry, he never hated anybody. He had every reason to be mad because he was autistic and people called him a retard every day, and he stuttered so bad that his eyes would contort and his eyes would roll in his head, his face would contort. He lived a 21 years of, I would say, suffering, and
Yes.
and it was taken from me. So I was angry. But what I didn't realize was is that he had lived a life that most people would be jealous of when you talk about impact. The number of
Yes.
since I wrote this book, the number of people who told me that my brother made a difference in their life in ways that I would have never dreamed of. They this Christian camp he worked at in the summer, built a gymnasium and named it after him. Like things that
Oh,
I
oh, I love that.
I thought my brother was incapable and needed me. Like that was it. I was his protector. I was my brother's keeper, and that's all I knew. I didn't know that every summer for 4 years in a row, he'd be gone for 3 months, and he was interacting with people on a daily basis and touching and changing lives. And I didn't know it. I wasn't there. I didn't experience that. So absent knowing it, I thought the only person I knew was the disabled young man that needed me. But it turns out my brother lived, and it's that knowledge that nothing is, whether it's a child born at birth and then dies a day later, or a 21-year-old who dies in a car accident, or somebody who lives to be 100. Whatever that length of time is, that's God's plan for you, and that
Mm,
your job in that period of time that He allows you to have here is to do as much serving and as much good as you possibly can. And not everybody identifies with that and accomplishes that, but that was what I believe. So I spent 13 years being angry about something that I had no business and no right to be angry about because God didn't mess up. I just thought He did. And it wasn't until I took those anger blinders off that I saw everything. And even after I wrote the book, I was starting to feel forgiven and healed. But it wasn't until I heard the stories from people who read the book and said, "Oh my God, that I can see. I totally saw Andy in this section of the book." And that's when I was envisioning this moment that I had with your brother. And they tell me this moment, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you named your kid
yes.
after my brother." Like,
Yes. Yes.
no, I would have never thought that.
Right. And it's an illustration that that disabled kid who needed you was legit and real, and that kid who touched all those lives, so that a basketball court was named after him or whatever, was also real. We all contain so many different versions of ourselves, and the idea is to integrate all of that and to know it and be self-aware and self-reflective and to celebrate it. Like even when you were doing all those things, when you were angry and pissed off and like SWAT team and daring God to take you, you were probably that and probably something else too, right? I mean, still a partner, still a dad, whatever it was. So it's so much more complex than we ever know, which is why the test of any theology is in its social impact, is in its like increasing love, increasing compassion, increasing a sense that we're all in this together. So I love hearing your story, man. That's powerful, dude. Like that's really great story.
I appreciate that. I think we all have that. I think we all have a story like that. It's whether or not
Yes.
you're willing to accept it and address it and appreciate it. The leaning in, and we've all heard that you got to lean into the sadness or the hurt or the anguish or the whatever. And there's nothing more truer than that. Like if you lean in and embrace it,
Right.
it hurts. Yes, there's no doubt it's going to hurt. There's no doubt it's going to be hard. And I think as humans, we want to skip the hard part.
Of course, it's
Every
not
aspect.
much fun.
And I
It's
think
not much fun.
that's part of why we are where we are as a world, is because we have a society where people don't want to do the hard part. And it's an instant gratification world. And
Right.
part of
It's hard work.
and what I do is to help people understand that it's not there's not a formula that allows you to skip the hard parts to get to the end. Life
There's
is
no formula.
life is
So,
it's a journey of hard parts.
so the formula that I use in this book is name the experience, have a prayerful orientation, whatever that means to you, meditative, reflective, prayerful orientation, and then ask the right questions. So after a story in which I tell a story about a woman who's about to go to hospice. Her family went home to get some much needed rest, and it was a Friday night, and the nurse calls me. It's like 7:30 at night. Nobody wants to see a chaplain at 7:30 at night unless they really need to. And this guy said, the nurse says, Roger, she's in there. She's confused. She's muttering the Lord's Prayer, and she's going to go to hospice. And I was like, yeah, of course I'll sit with her. So I hold her hand, and sure enough, she's saying the Lord's Prayer. And I join in with her. And at one point when we're coming to the end, she says, oh, well, I seem to have forgotten the end, but thank you, God, for everything, right? It's perfect, right? So after that, and then she went to hospice and died a couple days later. But after telling that story and writing a prayer, I asked these questions. How have you accompanied the frail, the weak, the very vulnerable? What did you do? What part of you emerged that was a surprise? How has another accompanied you in a difficult time? What do you remember and what seemed to help? Who are your guides and what do they teach you? The idea is that we all have, the helper, the servant, and the need to be helped. And if we can just have a reflective question about that story, we can all tell stories that will impact each other.
I love that. I think I love the fact that you end the stories with those reflective questions, because it is a lot of people read and they don't absorb because they're just reading to get to the next page or the next chapter or the end of the book, and they're not necessarily grasping the intent of the author, the nuances of the book, and I think when you force the question, like the review, like of each, I think that's a smart, very intuitive writing style. And I think it's important for people to, especially in books like that, and even with my book, it's a true story, and there's a lot of ups and downs, and sadness, and happiness, and anger, and everything in between in the book. And I want people to experience them, and then when they're done, I want them to identify with at least one character in the book, whether it was my mom or my brother or whatever. And I think that's one of the greatest. I would do book signings or just talk, and I do presentations or whatever. People would tell me after they read the book, oh, your Aunt Arlene is so much like my mom, or what, like whoever. And yes. So to me, I'm like, all right, you identified, and that person stayed with you. And I think having something that stays with you, like the quote from that the guy that changed their life from Boston, those are important things for your soul and your mind to absorb and to hold on to, because at the moment, it's like in I always tell people in war and in law enforcement and SWAT and high stress chaos situations, you resort back to your experiences, your training, and your mental approach to things, the preparation. And whether it's in sports or whatever, that's just how you're going to act in the biggest moments and the highest pressure. And I think having, in the worst day of your life, the worst moments of your life, having something that rises up and helps create clarity of focus, I think is important.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the stories I tell in here is about, not all the stories are from chaplaincy or religious text. I have stories about the Buddha and Muhammad, but one of the stories is from James Baldwin, the writer, and the mid to late 20th century gay Black writer. And he tells this story about a time when he was refused service, and he was with a friend. It was in Jersey, and they were like, we don't serve Negroes here. And he said he went to the nicest restaurant he could go to, where he said even if the Virgin Mary was with him, he would not be served. And he throws a glass of water at this waitress, and this whole mob comes after him, right? And he's like, oh my God, he realizes in that moment he escaped. His friend helped him escape, but he realizes he could have been killed, and he could have killed somebody else. And he says he had to let go of that anger. He had to let go of that hatred, or it was going to kill him. He was like, the white mob isn't going to kill me. It's my hatred. It's going to kill me. And he had to let that go. So there's a lot of stories around different scenarios in this book. So
the complexity of it, and yet probably the simple structure of it, because it doesn't sound like it's not a textbook. It's like it's got this simple formula for how it's laid out, but yet the complexities of the different ways you're going to get a reader to open their mind and open their heart up to, because one story may connect more than another one, and if you're constantly in the same thread, you're probably going to lose the reader. And I like that you were able to flip it up a little bit. And I think that's, and then when it comes to writing, and I've been writing for a long time, but never books. I've written one. I've got 3 others halfway written, but I can't finish them because the topic was too hard and timing's not right, and certain different things. But I know that the ability, even though you're writing, I wrote my life story, I had to write my life story in a way that didn't just stay in one tone.
Right.
So there might have been other stories that I wanted to put in the book, but it didn't fit into the way that the book was written to engage. So I think there's an intentional component to everything in life, whether it's parenting, whether it's ministry, whether it's your faith, whether it's being a husband or a father or a friend. If you're not living intentionally, I think that's where a lot of people get lost, is because they sort of just do. They wash, rinse, repeat, and there's not a lot of intentionality to it.
Yep. That's what the book is for. Seeds of Devotion. That's what it's for. I've so enjoyed this time with you. I just can't even tell you how grateful I am to have met you, how enriched I am by this encounter.
I appreciate it, friend.
Yeah, man. I did not know what to expect. I knew that I liked your title, 2 Dates and a Dash. I was like, oh yeah, that's the deep end of the pool. That's like.
So very few people get that. People don't understand it when they read it. Like, what the hell is that? Like,
right. You got to know that dash is all that matters.
So and I got that from Tebow, actually. He used to do a lot in his talks about the dash and
the dash.
And so he would reference that a lot. So when I was coming up with names on what I wanted my show to be about, and I didn't want to, I don't want to be ever pigeonholed. I'm not a guy that likes to be put in a box. So I wanted to have a broad enough title that allowed me to have as many different types of guests as I wanted, but also fit into the moral fiber of what I was trying to do with the show, which is to share stories of people who are truly living their dash. So I appreciate you identifying the title of the show and making that connection. So thank you.
Yeah, this has been a real pleasure and a real privilege. So thank you. And folks can get my book, Seeds of Devotion, on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Cokesbury or other places online where you can get those. And,
people follow you on social media. Are you on social media?
Yeah, Roger Butts at Facebook and Roger Butts at Twitter. And Seeds of Devotion, the book on Facebook, I think. Um, and then I write at medium.com and Contemplative Light. Medium.com, I think I'm under Roger Butts Liberal Christian or something. And then on Contemplative Light, it's just under my name. I'm one of the contributors to that group. So
I'm going to put the link to Amazon in the show notes so people can directly click on that. And the show should be out probably by the end of the week.
Okay, perfect.
I'll email you the links to everything. And I really do. First of all, I commend you on your chosen vocation and avocation, because it's not something that everyone can do. I do believe there are people who are called to do certain work, and police work, I believe, is very similar in that you can't just choose between being an accountant, an insurance adjuster, and a cop. Like it's something that you have to be drawn towards. There's a reason why you're going into a servant type world, and if the ones that do it well are the ones that were chosen and called. And I appreciate anyone who answers the call, whether it's running towards danger or running into a burning building or ministering to people who need the guide to the Lord. I think it's a noble profession that doesn't get the appreciation that it deserves. And having lived my life with a stepfather who's a pastor, I can tell you that firsthand is true. So thank you. Hang tight. We're going to talk off the air. Everybody, I truly hope you enjoyed this very different episode, because we've never had a person whose job is to be a pastor on the show yet. So I was very honored to have Roger on, and I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got some value and understanding on the profession of being a chaplain in the hospital and in the clergy, and how the connectivity to God and the understanding of your role in this world and the purpose of your life is kind of the big picture question, right? So the goal is of this show to help spread that word that your purpose is there. You just got to open your eyes and clear your mind and clear your spirit to identify it and then go pursue it.
And no matter what you call yourself or how you identify or anything else, everybody has that connectivity.
Everybody, thank you for watching and listening to this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. Once again, if you want to find out where to hear the podcast, just go to anywhere podcasts are played audio-wise. Make sure you hit that automatic download button and subscribe, and also go to Matt Cubbler on YouTube. Hit subscribe and hit the little dingy thing. And if you want to get a copy of A Brother's Love, a memoir, you can go to mattcubbler.com. Everybody, God bless, take care, and go out and be kind to one another.